In my 35 years in Korea, I've been to a few funerals. Most recently, my mother-in-law's. She passed away a little over a week ago. And in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about my experiences at funerals in Korea. We are walking along the Bugak Mountain Road. It goes up Bugaksan, Bugak Mountain, also known as Baekaksan. My mother-in-law actually used to live somewhere near here when she was a little girl. I published a video last year about an area called Miari, and when my wife and my mother-in-law and I were watching it together, my mother-in-law, who was suffering from dementia, she kept repeating Miari Jeongneung every time she heard me say Miari in the video. Jeongneung is a royal tomb that's situated not far from what we today consider Miari. My wife and I figure she must have lived somewhere near the tomb because she never used either word alone. She never talked about Jeongneung, she never talked about Miari. It was always Miari Jeongneung. Bugak Hanul-gil, the Bugak Skyway. Hanu means sky or heaven. I never experienced a Korean funeral until after I had already been here for over a decade. My wife and I were married about 3 or 4 years when I first went to a funeral. It was one of her great uncles on her mother's side of the family. Korean funerals, at the funeral hall, they're not these quiet, somber experiences like the funerals I grew up experiencing at funeral homes in the southern US, where you go in and everybody talks at a whisper. No, it's not like that here. Korean funerals are not celebratory, you know, it's not New Orleans style of loudness and raucousness, but they're not somber affairs. They have food, you know, anybody who comes in any time of day, as long as the kitchen's open, you know, there's always food for you when you arrive. They have alcohol, soju, beer, in refrigerators usually in the room. So whenever you want another one of the staff can bring it to you, or you can get up and get it yourself. But yeah, it's not celebratory. So for example, there's no toasting, right? Immediate relatives and some of the extended relatives will stay all through the night at the funeral hall. The immediate family is there for 2 nights usually, and the extended relatives usually come for 1 night. Some of them stay, some of them don't. Friends of the family, or, you know, extended relatives who are busy will come and say hello, sit for an hour or whatever, and then leave. But my first experience involved a lot of soju. I had given up soju before then because soju and I just do not get along, but I wanted to make a good impression. Most of the relatives there were people I had never met. They were all older than me, pretty much. So that meant, you know, I wasn't really in a position to be refusing drinks when somebody offered to pour me a shot. I made an exception that night for my soju restriction. And I paid the price for it. I had missed the funeral of one of my wife's uncles, one of my mother-in-law's brothers. So at this great uncle's funeral, after I was well and truly intoxicated, at one point I was crying on my mother-in-law's shoulder, apologizing profusely for missing her brother's funeral. And she had her arm around me, patting me on the shoulder. It's okay, I understand, it's okay. That was a display in front of my wife's entire extended family, but it wasn't over, because shortly after that, I passed out in the restroom on the floor, and one of her cousins hoisted me up over his shoulder and carried me back into the main room, where I slept under a table and woke up in the morning in a puddle of puke with a massive hangover. I was mortified, horribly embarrassed, and my wife said, "Are you kidding? They love you." So that was my introduction to Korean funerals and most of my wife's extended family. When my wife and I receive notifications from friends about a relative's funeral, one of their relatives, we will go usually and stay briefly. Again, when you're not family or you're not, close friends, there's no reason to stay all night. So when you go to a funeral hall, they'll have usually multiple rooms, and in front of each room is a desk behind which you'll find one or two of the bereaved family members. And there's a book where you can sign your name, and there's a slot usually at one end of the desk or both ends of the desk where you can drop an envelope of condolence money. And how much you give, it depends on your relationship with the person, either the deceased or one of the deceased's family members, right? Some people leave 50,000, some people leave 100,000. Those are pretty common. But for somebody you're closer to, you might leave 200, 300, even 500,000 or more. It's entirely up to you. And that money is used to put toward the funeral expenses. You take off your shoes and you go through the door, and you'll be in the main room where they have all the tables, and that's where all the eating and drinking takes place. So there'll usually be several people sitting at the tables when you arrive, but then off to one side of that room they have another special little space.
The entire suite is called a binso in Korean, and we might translate that as funeral room. The small space off to the side is a bunhyangshil, which literally means the incense burning room. I think a better translation in English is mourning room. The mourning room is where guests pay their respects to the deceased. How they do that depends both on the ritual framework set by the family and on the background of each individual guest. Funeral hall websites typically have a page outlining the expected etiquette for Catholics, Protestants, and Buddhists. What I'm describing in this video falls under a Buddhist framework because my mother-in-law was Buddhist. But each individual guest was free to pay their respects in their own way within that framework.
And this is where you'll find a little altar set up with the deceased's photo, usually flowers and some offerings and incense on a small table, and maybe a little kettle of alcohol that's used for some of the rites that are performed. But as a guest, when you come in, before you sit down at the table, you go to the mourning room, and there's a mat on the floor there, and you get on the mat and you bow to the photo of the deceased. You bow to the altar. You don't have to do the formal bow where you get down on your knees and put your hands on the floor and your forehead to your hands. You don't have to do the formal bow. You can do just a bow like this. That's perfectly fine. And you bow twice. And then one or more of the bereaved family members will be standing off to one side of the space, and you turn to them and you bow to them, and just once, and they will bow back to you. And again, you can do the half bow or the formal bow, but most people, in my experience, do the formal bow to the family members, even if they only do the standing bow to the altar. There's one person whose responsibility it is to stand there in that room. That's the chief mourner, the sangju. Usually it's the eldest son, or somebody who can step in for it. Usually I've seen more than one person standing there, usually two or three. I didn't do that so much at my father-in-law's funeral, but at my mother-in-law's funeral last week, I did. It was my brother-in-law, me, and my younger sister-in-law's husband. We were the ones there most of the time. From the visitor perspective, that's basically it. You drop off your money, you come in and you bow and offer your condolences, and then you sit down and have a bite and maybe a little to drink, chat with people if you know anybody there. If the chief mourner is the only person you know, then you're probably not going to be able to have much time to chat. If you're there, during the peak hours when most people are visiting, because the chief mourner is going to be in the mourning room. There are several of these little guard posts, fighting positions, whatever you call them, around Bugaksan. Yeah. I didn't participate in any of the behind the scenes stuff at my father-in-law's funeral. I missed most of it because I was, interacting with other relatives and drinking. Again, that was 2020. I was, 49 years old, but I still felt like I couldn't refuse, the drinks. So I, again, drank too much soju that night, had a nasty hangover the next day. But for my mother-in-law's funeral last week, I figured, you know what, I'm old enough now. If somebody wants to pour me some soju, I can decline. And everything was good, no problem. So this was the first family funeral I've been to where I stayed sober the whole time. But I did participate in the process more. It started on the night my mother-in-law passed. Usually the day of death, from what I understand, is the first of a 3-day funeral process. But in this case, my mother-in-law passed very late on a Friday night. So Saturday became the first day of the funeral. An ambulance transported her body from Seoul to Chungju in the wee hours. I think they came to the hospice around 1 a.m. I was there with my wife, her 2 sisters, her brother, another son-in-law, and our niece. So we all saw her body carried away. My wife's younger sister lives in Chungju, and she had come up to Seoul with her husband because of my mother-in-law's passing. So they went back to Chungju that night, and she started arranging things Saturday morning at the funeral hall. My older sister-in-law stayed at our house, and she and my wife and my brother-in-law went down to Chungju early Saturday morning to start handling everything. And they told me I didn't need to be there. We were worried about leaving our dogs at home for 2 whole days and nights and most of a 3rd day. So I stayed home Saturday and Saturday night, and I went down Sunday morning. So officially the space had opened up on Saturday. I don't know what time they opened it. I didn't ask, but some people stopped by Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. A lot of extended family dropped by. Some of them stayed all night, the second night. Some did not attend, and friends and relatives who didn't attend sent money, condolence money, directly to the bank accounts, my wife's or her sister's or whatever. So that's something that's pretty normal here, actually. If you can't attend a funeral or a wedding, you still send money if it's somebody you're connected to somehow. So behind the scenes, there is a point where they clean the body. And, all of these steps are rooted in tradition, but they're not followed in traditional ways anymore. But one of the steps, it used to actually be washing the body, from what I understand, back in the day. But these days, it's more about disinfecting, I guess. But they wash it down and they dress the body. They put on some clothing and, basically preparing to put it in the coffin. And my younger sister-in-law actually did that. She actually washed her mother's body. And here's a nice view of Cheongneung-dong. And that's Kookmin University right there in front of us. After the body's washed, there's a little ceremony or ritual or tradition, whatever you want to call it, where they put the body in the coffin. We, the immediate family, my wife, her sisters, her brother, and the 2 son-in-laws, we went down, and our niece, we went down to the basement, to a little room there where my mother-in-law was on a table and the coffin was next to it. And she had on this elaborate outfit, a cream-colored, really fancy kind of hanbok thing. And there was a director there to guide us through the process. Come and touch your mother, say goodbye to her. We left a note tucked into her belt. It was basically just a moment to say goodbye, and I have to say, it was the most emotionally intense moment of the whole process. I've never experienced anything quite like it. The coffin was padded on the inside with flowers and little paper butterflies. And we participated in putting her body into the coffin. And then they closed it up and tied it off, and that was it. And I've read that traditionally this is where the bereaved family members, the immediate family, would put on their mourning clothes, the black clothing. But in our case, which I believe is pretty common these days, the funeral home gave us mourning clothes on the first day. I mean, I got mine when I arrived on Sunday, but everybody else who was there on Saturday got theirs on Saturday before everything opened. So I had a pair of black pants that I wore on the bus to Chungju, along with a t-shirt. And when I got there, they gave me a white shirt and a black tie and a black jacket. And I had an armband with one stripe and a ribbon that says Howie. Now there's a loose system of what the stripes on the armbands mean. They all go to male relatives.
The website for Samsung General Hospital's funeral hall says that both sons and sons-in-law get 2 stripes on their armbands. The bands with 1 stripe and no stripe are reserved for other bogin. A bogin is a mourning relative, and Samsung defines it as someone within 8 degrees of kinship on the paternal side and within 4 degrees of kinship on the maternal side, with 1 stripe indicating the relative is married and no stripe indicating the relative is unmarried. But at the funeral hall where we had my mother-in-law's funeral, sons-in-law get 1 stripe, not 2.
The ribbon I had that said Sawi means son-in-law. So there's no mistaking me for a grandson. I had intended to stay on the road, but busy talking as I am, I kind of took a wrong turn and ended up on a trail, but that's fine. So the kitchen shut down pretty late. I don't know what time it was, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, something like that. But a few people stayed up all night drinking and talking. The immediate family members had a space that was a little room with a wardrobe, a closet and shelf and a toilet and a shower. So that's where most of us slept. I stayed out in the lobby. Somebody had themselves a good view here. Yeah, I stayed out in the lobby. They had some chairs there that were somewhat comfortable. So I put 2 chairs facing each other and sat in one and put my feet in another. And at one point, my wife came along and pushed a little table under my legs. And I didn't sleep a lot, and I didn't necessarily sleep well. I kept dozing off and waking up throughout the night from about, 2 or 3 a.m., I think is when I sat down. Somebody had to sit up and keep the incense burning all night, make sure it didn't go out. And the first night, my brother-in-law did that as the chief mourner. That's his responsibility. But he was up most of the night, Friday night, all night, Saturday night. So Sunday night, he kept insisting he would stay awake, but he ended up sleeping. And my wife sat up all night chatting with one of her uncles, and she kept the incense burning. So they woke us up early, 7 or 7:30, and we got ready. And then we had a ritual there, and this was led by my brother-in-law. He was primarily responsible for it. He was, he had to bow more than anybody else did. And he handled lighting some incense, pouring and offering the drink. And the rest of us just, bowed as the director told us we needed to bow. It's all very managed, right? Nobody has to worry about remembering what to do when. You've got the director there explaining it all for you. So after that, we went down to the basement to a little garage area. There's a driveway coming down and a hearse was backed in, parked at the bottom of the driveway. The coffin was on a cart, a wheeled cart outside of the hearse. Some of my brother-in-law's and sister-in-law's friends acted as pallbearers, and they carried it from the cart into the hearse, and then we had a moment to say another goodbye, and then it was time for everybody to make their way to the crematorium. The crematorium that we used has 3 lanes in the, driveway outside the main entrance. And when we arrived, our mother-in-law's hearse was parked in the middle lane. There was another one on the inside lane. And while we were waiting, a third one pulled up in the outside lane. So there were 3 groups of bereaved families. One of them was actually quite large, waiting behind these hearses. My father-in-law's urn was already in a niche in the building next door to the crematorium. I forget what they call it, a columnarium or something in English. I don't even know the Korean word for it, but it's the place where they have all the niches for the urns. So he's been there since 2020, October 2020. We were going to be moving him to a shared space, a double niche, so that he and my mother-in-law could be side by side there. They made the final arrangements there in the office, and then we just had to wait our turn to go in. And so eventually they called us, and the pallbearers took the coffin out of the hearse, put it on a cart, and they wheeled it in. And then we went to a room called a gobyoshil, which literally means farewell room. And so we could see my mother-in-law's coffin get wheeled into a furnace room, and then they closed the big door. And then they've got a display that tells you what the situation is. So the whole thing takes, 2 hours or something? 2.5 hours from beginning to end. I don't know how long it took. I didn't check the time. It was quite a while. But once that's done, then they have another room that you go to, and this is the part that I find I could do without. They show you the bones that come out of the furnace, right? It's not ashes yet. It's just chunks of crushed bones. Basically, it's been broken up by the heat. So you see the box of bones. They let you view it, and I guess that's your final farewell. And they grind the bones into dust and give you the urn there in the same window that they showed you the bones. Actually, I forgot to mention this. Somebody is designated as the bearer of the photo. So in this case, it was my niece carrying my mother-in-law's photo. So she carried the photo and out of the crematorium, and my brother-in-law carried the urn. And then you stop at this little station where they vacuum seal the urn, and then you go down into the other building and get to the niche and put it there and put any decorations you have in there, and then they seal it up. And you do another farewell there, I guess. My mother-in-law and father-in-law are now together in their niche. So I hope this video wasn't too much of a mess. I didn't know what I was going to say when I came out here. I just knew I wasn't ready to get back to my regular videos. I've been working on this guided walk video since July 1st, actually. I shot the primary footage on July 1st, and I've been working on it off and on ever since, trying to get it to the finish line. The video and the PDF guide and the map that's coming with it. It's been a lot of work. And for the past week, I haven't done anything with it. I'm nearing the end. I'm close to the finish line, but I felt like, given that I posted about my mother-in-law's passing on a community post last week, I just felt like I didn't want to jump right into something that was such a more of an upbeat video just yet. I just felt like I wanted to talk about my mother-in-law's funeral in particular, but also just my funeral experiences in general, just to give you an idea of what my perspective of Korean funerals has been like. And it's been very limited. I haven't been to a whole lot of funerals. Most of them have been the kind where you just drop in and stay for a little bit and then leave. I've missed some of my wife's relatives' funerals that have been, outside of Seoul. My wife, in those cases, told me, you don't need to go, just stay with the dogs. But I've been to a few, and only 3 of them now that I've stayed all night. So I have really limited experience with Korean funerals generally. But there's a lot of information online about it if you're interested in what the general process is like. And a lot of Korean funeral homes have actually information about the funeral process and how they carry it out, on their websites. So if you can go to a Korean funeral home website, I'll give you a link to one in the description. And most browsers these days have translation built in. If you highlight the text, you can right-click. You can get a better sense, a better idea of what Korean funeral process is like, a more detailed idea of what it's like. But if you made it this far, thanks for sticking around with me and hearing my tales. So that's all I have for you today, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.